morning, good morning. Welcome to another CPD Standards webinar. Good morning, you're all just coming in from the waiting room now. It's great to see you all, and thank you so much for dialing in this morning. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name's Amanda Rosehorn, and I am CEO and co-founder of the CPD Standards Office, which is part of a bigger organisation called the Professional Development Consortium. And we run these webinars regularly as a way for our community to connect with one another, to share stories, ideas, thoughts, top tips, and really try and unite our knowledge together. We very much feel that with our accredited provider base, that the power when we come together and look at how we delivered CPD accredited training, online education or coaching can be greatly enhanced. So it's my absolute pleasure this morning to welcome Andrew Coppin, who is also known as the Storyteller. His organisation is called My London Voice and is accredited with us as a formal CPD Standards accredited provider. And Andrew, you're going to be talking to us today about storytelling and the secret to marketing yourself. Tell me, how did you first start this business, and where did you get the inspiration from in order to start delivering workshops in this area?
Well, very good morning to everyone, and thank you again, Amanda, and to Kirsty for inviting me here today. To answer your question, really, I mean, it's a very short story. I know that's hard for me, but you could say the last company I worked for before I started to work for myself was JP Morgan, and I was there for 10 years. And as part of my role at JP Morgan, I got very involved in the diversity and equality and inclusion networking. And as part of that, I started a network group aimed at working parents and carers. And we used to invite speakers to come in. And I invited a speaker in, her name was Alison, and she came and did a talk on the art of storytelling. And I thought this was going to be totally correlated to reading and make reading more exciting with children. And actually, I realized from that workshop that this is something absolutely magical. And I became fascinated with it. And while I was working at JP Morgan, I started to get involved in the Society for Storytelling and understand what this old age art form was all about.
Right, I see. And then that's taken you now to My London Voice.
Yeah, when I left JP Morgan, I wanted to train as a teacher. And then I decided, speaking to other peers and colleagues that work in storytelling, they did this full time as a job. And I started to do educational enrichment in schools. And then I realized, actually, I would love to bring this back to the professional industry and help individuals with public speaking and presentation skills using storytelling. So My London Voice, we incorporated in 2018. So we haven't been going all that long.
Oh, well, thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. So a warm welcome to all of you, those of you that have just joined us. We'll shortly be handing over to Andrew to deliver today's session. Just to let you know that if you have your camera on, and we love to see your face and your participation in the webinar, that the recording will be uploaded to YouTube. So you're more than welcome to have your camera on, but you may forever be immortalised on YouTube if you decide to do that. And just a little bit of housekeeping around the chat. If you could use the chat to post comments, thoughts, observations, that would be great. If you have any specific questions about your CPD Standards membership or your assessments or any queries about subscription, payments, etc., please do message Kirsty Walker, my colleague who is on the group here directly, so that we can keep the chat 100% focused on the topic today and use it as CPD for ourselves. So Andrew, delighted to hand over to you. I'm going to go on mute and switch my camera off, so we've got full concentration on you, and looking more forward to understanding how we tell our stories for marketing in business. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Amanda. And I'm just going to say to everyone, please, if you have anything that comes to your mind, you want to ask me a question, just throw it into the chat. And then Kirsty will be able to just ask that question just in case I miss it. But there will be time at the end for Q&A. I certainly have made time for that. So storytelling, it's one of those things when I say to people, what do you understand by storytelling? Many people do think about Grimm's fairy tales or sitting on the side of your child's bed and telling them, or reading a story. Is often a little bit of confusion between reading and storytelling. But storytelling in the practice and the training that I do is really about you standing up in front of an audience. And what is an audience? Well, an audience can be one person to thousands of people. So it's an age-old tradition, and it's something which I'm going to show you a little bit of background and the science behind storytelling, just to show why it works and why it's so powerful. So before I get going into that, I wanted to share a picture with you. I hope you can pick up my accent. I am from South Africa. I've been living in the UK since 2001. So I've just celebrated my 21st anniversary of living in the UK. And this picture is actually from a game reserve in the northern parts of South Africa. It's called Mohondoro, and it means lion. And this picture was taken after an incredible thunderstorm. So if you've had the opportunity of going to South Africa, or any game reserve for that matter, and you get caught in a downpour, you often know that it's not going to last for very long. And you can see the ground is not very wet at all, but the rain had passed by. And there was the most incredible scent coming off the ground. And I was telling my daughter this, my eldest daughter at the time, and she was in year 7 at school. And she said to me, "Dad, do you know what that means?" And I went, "Sorry, what means? What are you on about?" She said, "The smell that you get off the earth after it's rained." I said, "No." She said, "It's petrichor." And you know, I will never forget that. But I will also never forget this holiday that we went on. And I like to share this because I think as part of any presentation, anytime you stand up in front of an audience, it's finding a way to connect with your audience. I mean, some of the tips and techniques that I'm going to share with you today are really around you standing up in front of people, because for me, the most important thing is when you provide an experience, you are providing an experience to whatever the format of your communication is, whether it's an interview, a sales pitch, a keynote address, or even something for a social engagement. You want to provide your audience with an experience, and ultimately getting your audience to think, to feel, and remember. So you want them to remember you for the right reason. So this is definitely, it's a huge link between standing up in front of people and talking and marketing. Now, before I carry on, I just want to say I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint. I really am not, because I feel that in the true sense of storytelling, we're not really using technology. But we haven't had much of a choice, especially over lockdown. And many storytellers, or anybody that I worked with, works in performing arts, will attest to the fact that jumping on board and trying to use technology and using things like Zoom was a bit of a minefield. But we have practiced and we've worked with it over the 2 years and found ways to actually use it effectively and still engage with your audience. Now, one of the things that I just would like to ask you to do, and maybe you don't, maybe you probably know this already, but where you see the green bar that says Andrew Coppin is sharing his screen, on the side are some drop-down arrows. And if you click on those, right at the bottom, you'll see side-by-side view. And if you click on that option, what it does then is it splits your screen between the PowerPoint slides that I'm sharing and myself, because I want you to be able to see me. And then in between the two screens, there will be some black space. And if you take your little cursor into that space, an invisible drag line will appear. And then you can move that to the left and right to decide whether you want to see more or less of me. The choice is yours. Okay. Now, just going back, thinking about the timeline, thinking about human beings. I'm not an anthropologist, and I'm certainly not a paleontologist. I trained as a chartered accountant. But I'm fascinated, I should say, about this whole journey that we as human beings have undertaken. and the way that we communicate today. And if we think about the modern human being going back 200,000 years ago and today, when did things really change from a communication point of view? I mean, even only 3,000, or what, 5,000 years ago, so 3,000 before Common Era, right? Then we started to have evidence of actual writing. But how long have we actually been using something like storytelling as a form of communication? And I'll show you right at the very end. I'm going to share a story with you right at the very end to emphasize that point. But we look at the population as well. I mean, even 1,000. So what we're talking, 1,000 years ago, 250 million people in the world. And today, we're close to 8 billion. Now, it does make me think then, and look at the philosophy, if we look at the philosophy around storytelling as well, and we go back to the Greeks. And the way I always like to remember, Aristotle's famous for communication theory. And many of you have probably come across this, ethos, logos, and pathos. But the way we connect with our audience is not necessarily on the ethical and logical information that we're sharing, but it's how we are actually connecting with our audience through emotions. And a lot of that comes through story. Now, just Aristotle was taught by Socrates, and Socrates was taught by Plato. I didn't study philosophy at school, but there is so much out there today where you can actually become quite absorbed, and you can learn so much around the history of communication. And Socrates, we're hearing more and more trainers using the works of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle in training. But I love this because I'm thinking, goodness me, 2,500 years ago, we're still using this information. So just goes to show, if we go back to this timeline, it goes to show that we're not that old as a civilization. We really are not. And have we really evolved that much? Now, our brain is a wonderful thing. And the neuroscience that's been done now since the invention of the MRI scanner, the neuroscience behind the brain and what researchers are finding through storytelling is absolutely astounding. And I brought something actually along with me today. It is, in fact, a brain, right? And I just want to remind you something about how we react as human beings. We feel before we think. Right? We feel before we think. And storytelling can really start to generate certain hormones. Hormones, things like dopamine. Dopamine that helps you with memory retention and helps you with focus. Oxytocin. Oxytocin is that hormone that helps us with connecting with one another. And then endorphins. It's something that we create when we find ourselves happy and excited. But the interesting thing that researchers have found through using MRI scanning is that when someone tells a story, there's things like neuron mirroring and coupling effects. So they see the same parts of the brain highlighting between the teller and the listener. And you can actually find yourself becoming absolutely connected and one with the storyteller. Now, this is something which is very important as well. When I talk about the oral tradition of storytelling, it really requires you to be relaxed. And I'm going to do something today, which I do all the time in my webinars and all of my training sessions, is I want to make sure that it's interactive and participatory. Now, I appreciate we're not doing this live in person, and some of you might be sitting in an open plan office, but please do try in some shape or form to take part today. Now, before we get on to that, I want to just think about these three statements. So evolution has hardwired the instinct of survival into us. And the three main things that humans have needed for survival: food, procreation, or sex, and story. And story was the way that we educated one another. And now I would love to ask you this question. How long have we been using PowerPoint? emails, and WhatsApp, not for very long. So it's no surprise that we're still struggling to adapt and use this communication tool. Okay, time for some fun. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to break up today into the 3 V's. I'm going to start to look at visual. So visual, how do we actually appear to our audience? Now, there's no real, I mean, there is a difference between doing stuff online and in person. But I just want to reiterate the point I made about don't let PowerPoint take control. You want people to remember you. And I'm sure many people love hiding behind a video camera that's turned off and just sharing their screen. But are you remembered? And this is the important thing. So I want you to really, Elizabeth Gilbert's book, The Big Magic. I don't know how many people may have read that. And it's a book really around encouraging you to be creative and encouraging you to be brave. And I always like to think about being excited as well, understanding that fear is totally normal. And if fear is normal, then we can build a coping mechanism to deal with it. So how do you present yourself? How do you sit in front of your audience? How do you stand in front of your audience? And the power pose is something which maybe some of you have heard of this before, but if you were to stand up, and you can do this sitting down as well, but just making sure that you are sitting straight, your shoulders are back, and think about your head. Your head is the same weight as a 10-pin bowling ball, right? So you want to make sure that your head is sitting nicely on top of your neck and you're standing tall. And I'll show you as well why it's important that we're standing tall, because of course, from a breathing point of view, we want to make sure that our airways are open. Shoulders back. And if you're sitting in a chair, you still want to be making sure that you're sitting with your back straight against the chair. If you find yourself leaning forward because you're having to look at something or you can't quite see what the images is, or you're struggling to get yourself into camera, adjust your screen, adjust your camera, making sure that your line of sight is directly in front of people. Hand movement is an interesting one because hand movement can be very distracting, particularly if you're online. And if I'm doing this and let's say my internet speed wasn't very good, you would just see these blurred marks going across the screen. And that can be very distracting. And the same thing when you're standing in front of an audience. But use your hands in sync to the speed or pace of the words you're using, but also you can use them as an example. If you're talking about a profit forecast, or you're talking about the revenue growth of a company, you can actually take your hands and move them in line with the curve of that graph. But your hand movement must be in sync to the actual delivery of your words. Eye contact is something which I can really throw people off. And I found in my experience and working with certain clients, people hate it when they see the audience looking at them. It can really throw them off. But I want to assure you that when your audience is looking at you, it's one of the best ways of knowing if your audience is engaged with you. Now, when you are working online, there's also something very important, which is about making sure that your camera lens is in line with your eyes, because that's the way that your audience are going to see you. And you are looking at your audience, right? And when they see you looking through you're looking through the lens, they're going to see your eyes. And that's the way that they're going to feel that you are talking to them. I will share with you a little tip and technique that I use. And I'm going to use my little tablet here. And what I tend to do is, if you take a little piece of paper, okay, so I've folded it there. And on that little piece of paper, I draw a little smiley face. And I just hang that piece of paper where my camera lens is, so to the left or to the right. And what that does is it just reminds me to keep looking up, to keep looking at the camera lens, and to also try, not necessarily smile the whole time, but just to try and remember to just keep the edges of your mouth up a little bit, because the delivery of your sound is totally different in that regard. Now, I must have hit the button because I've jumped ahead there to vocal and enunciation. But before I do that, actually, I'm going to go back just. I want to do something with you around breathing. So what I'd like you to do is take your hands and just rest them on your tummy. All right. So just, you can do the sitting down or you can stand up if you want. So if you are standing up, just keeping your knees nice and loose, not locked, shoulders are back, you're standing tall. And I want you to put your hands on your tummy. Now, what I want you to do is breathe in really slowly through your nose. But as you breathe in, allow your lungs to expand. And as your lungs expand, your diaphragm is going to move down. Your diaphragm is that muscle that separates our breathing apparatus from our abdomen. So the diaphragm is going to move down, which means that if your stomach muscles are relaxed, your lungs can expand and your tummy is going to stick out of it. So I really want you to try and do this for me now. Okay, so hands on your tummy and let's breathe in really slowly. And then breathe out through your mouth really slowly as well, as long as you can. And try and get all the air out of your lungs. Let's do that again. So this time you should be able to get more air into your lungs. So breathing in. And this time, now if you're in an open plan office, you may not be able to do this, but if you are on mute, great. I just want you to sing out for me as loud as you can in just one constant note. All right, so and then, yes, we're going to do it again. So breathe in again. This time you should get even more air into your lungs. And breathe out. Now, the reason I wanted to share that breathing is because, as I said, fear is totally normal. And whenever we are perhaps doing a sales pitch, or we are doing a presentation or an interview, or even a keynote address, there are going to be elements of nerves and anxiety. It's totally normal. But breathing really, really helps us. And breathing is so important, especially if I go back to our brain, and I'm just going to open it up, split it open, as you do. So here's the brainstem coming up, the limbic region of our brain, the amygdala, slap bang. Amygdala is our register for stressful situations, and the amygdala will, help us in situations for fight or flight. And stage fright is one of those things that we are so stressed out and we are so caught up in the moment that we forget to breathe. Now, we do breathe nonetheless, but we would breathe at a quicker pace. So if you take your hand and just put it at the top of your chest and breathe really quickly. So it's exhausting. We're not getting oxygen into our bloodstream, which means that we're not getting oxygen into the wonderful cortex, the thinking part of our brain. So breathing really does help us. And it's not just breathing before we start to talk. It's ensuring that we're breathing throughout our delivery. So bringing me to the vocal side of things now, and thinking about enunciation, people say to me, and I did say right at the outset that I'm from South Africa. And when I first came to South Africa, I will say that I had a very bad habit, as many South Africans do, of mumbling and not actually moving the mouth, not actually allowing the correct formation of the sounds to come out. And it's just something that we South Africans do. Nonetheless, my accent is still with me, but I've worked with a wonderful voice coach over many years. And I've found that, especially the work I do in performance theatre, that I've had to learn not only how to create a powerful voice and to be able to project in a theatre style venue, but also it helps me with the enunciation of the words. When I get people coming to me and say, I want you to help me to eradicate my accent, I go, no, I don't like that at all. We're not here. I don't do accent neutralization. And I don't want you to try and create a different accent. What we can work on is perhaps softening the accent a little bit through correct voice work, but it does come down to actually practicing vowels and consonants, and finding ways to actually, put that into practice. So finding opportunities to do talks, finding opportunities to actually, and making the time to practice. If you go onto Google and you were to type tongue twisters, many of you would know tongue twisters, but tongue twisters are a fabulous way. It's alliteration, emphasis on the consonant sounds, but it's a fabulous way to help you in the enunciation of your speech. And I would also say, please, please, please do use the recording technologies in our devices, our smartphones, because listening to the sound of your voice is so important. And if I ask this question in this room, how comfortable are you around listening to yourself? Well, many people don't like it. And there's a reason for that. And the reason we don't like the sound of our voice is because it's not familiar. We don't recognize it. It's something, again, very instinctive in us as humans. If we don't like something, we tend to be a little bit scared of it. So going back to our days of hunter-gatherers, if we came into a tribe of unknown people, we would be very nervous, very scared. We may end up in the cooking pot, which, we're not too sure about that. So we need to make sure that the unknown becomes a known. It's the same thing with our voice. So from a young age, ever since we've been able to talk, we've been hearing the sound of our voice. I shouldn't just say talk. From the moment we've been making a sound, we've been hearing those sounds from two sources. One, so internal. So think about your ear. Your ear is a mechanical instrument. It's broken up into three parts: the outer ear, the middle ear, and then the inner ear. And the inner ear is what creates the electronic signals that go to the brain. So those two sources that when we speak, we hear ourselves, there's the sound that comes from our voice box and that travels inside. So through tissue, bone, blood, etc., straight to the inner ear. And then there's the sound that comes out our mouth into our outer ear, middle ear, inner ear, and the two sounds come together. And what you hear from yourself is this wonderful, harmonious, recognizable voice. However, when you take something like this and you record your voice and you listen to it, it's only coming in through one source: your outer ear, middle ear, inner ear. Higher pitch, different frequency. You don't recognize it. It sounds like a squeaky chipmunk maybe, and you go, nah, that's not me. I don't like it. The thing is, that is you. And the more you listen to it, the better it gets. Until that point where you're actually listening to your own podcast and you become totally enchanted by it. And you are caught up in the entire, that's a wonderful moment to get to, and you will get there, I promise you. Now, people say to me, what do I record? If you don't do podcasting, if you don't record video things or video blogs or anything like that, I say to clients, what are you interested in? Find something that you're interested in and just start to do a daily journal. Even if you did a daily journal of what you did and record it. But here's the thing. I want you to do this. I want you to record it, save it, share it, and then listen to it. Because the problem is, if you record and listen, you go, no, don't like that. It's horrible, not going to send it. But if you save it and you send it, and then you listen to it, well, guess what? It's too late. But I promise you now, if you find a trusted group of people, like a little peer group, trusted friends or family members, and say, I want to try and do this journal, this audio journal, you will find they will come back and go, that was great. Please, can I have some more? It's amazing. But we do this thing to ourselves, whether it's, I want to call it imposter syndrome or whatnot, but I want you to be brave to give it a go. All right. So enunciation, variation is really thinking about, those people that you've been to those presentations where people stand up and they do a talk and the PowerPoint slide is there and they're standing up behind the lectern and their notes in front of them and they just read and they read and they read, and you decide, well, you know what, I'm going to just hold my phone so that they can't see it. probably going to go on Facebook. I'm probably going to check my diary. The problem is that person speaking is going to lose their audience. So variation is not just, especially through storytelling, it's not just changing the pace and the pitch and the tone of the words you use, but it's also thinking about engagement with the audience. So how do you ensure that your audience is listening to you? I often ask this question. People say to me, oh, well, people are making notes, or people are looking at you. You know, it's very hard because we all take in information in different ways. I mean, the person taking notes, how do you know that they're actually taking notes about what you're talking about? I like to always think that through people looking at me, it's a better way of me appreciating that they're listening. But again, I want to just, and this probably does come back to the visual aspect as well. It's a very, very important thing when people are looking at you, is don't get thrown off by the appearance of the person's face or their body language. Because adults, grown-ups, are more relaxed when it comes to listening or being part of the audience. And their faces will not necessarily correlate to what they think of what you're talking about. So you may very well, as an example, you may very well have the person sitting there going, looking at you like this. Now, what you're talking about has resonated with that person so much that they're going, I can't believe that I didn't do that. This is amazing. This is the best talk I've ever been to. Or the person sitting there and shaking their head. And you see someone in the audience shaking their head, you're probably going to think, oh my goodness, this person doesn't agree with what I'm talking about. It can totally throw you. So the best advice I can give is just move on and find those faces in the audience, the ones that are looking at you and smiling, and just come back to them for reassurance throughout the talk. But you'll be amazed, that person that's sitting in the front row, scowling and shaking their head and looks really fidgety and unsettled and unhappy, they may very well come to you at the end and go, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, of course, if you were to do this in front of a younger audience, around the age of 5 or so, well, guess what? You will know whether they're happy, whether they're sad, or whether they're bored, because a bored 3-year-old or 4-year-old, or 5, 6, 7-year-old, well, they just get up and walk out. But we professionals, we can't do that, right? We have to sit there and we have to, and well, we have to sit there. We can't go. Going back to the breathing part, and I'm glad I did the breathing earlier, because this part of vocal, the power of pause, is quite incredible, and particularly when it comes to silence. What happens when you stop speaking in front of a room of people? Everyone looks up. Silence is so incredibly powerful. Silence is also an opportunity for you to stop and breathe, perhaps have a drink of water. But starting to use silence when you're doing your delivery makes your communication that much more powerful. And if you think about silence being more powerful than the words you use, it stands to reason that we should use it more. What silence also does is it gives the opportunity to the audience to take on board what you've been talking about. Because unfortunately, if you haven't practiced your presentation or your delivery, and you are very nervous and you're very anxious, and I have had clients that will admit that they just want to get the experience over with, and they try to deliver their presentation as quickly as possible, you struggle to visualize it. You struggle with the whole aspect of experience. You can't understand it, so therefore you're struggling to think it through. It's such a rush that it's a whole mix of emotions. You're not feeling correctly, and ultimately you're probably not going to remember that person. So how do you use power of pause? How do you use pause effectively? I like to think of it really, just think about your punctuation. Now, not everybody will write out the text for their talk, and I'm not a huge advocate, because I would say to people, well, storytelling is all about your mind's eye. It's how we visualize things. And I like people to, if they're going to use PowerPoint, fine, but they don't need necessarily to stand behind a lectern. I'm not a huge fan. So going back to the visual aspect of things, standing behind the lectern, you may very well disappear, right? You may, you can become something totally separate to the presentation. All people remember is the PowerPoint presentation. You don't really want that. So disengaging from the lectern and being visually present so the audience can see you is important, but also ensuring that people can hear you. And it's wonderful as well when you do use the pause and you stand and you look around the audience and you just stop and you look and you engage with the audience. It's a wonderful way for them to remember you. So coming now to the third V, so the verbal side. And verbal really comes down to thinking now from a grammatical point of view, but thinking more from the actual noun itself and the words we're using. This is where we start to think about storytelling. And if anything, I want you to take away the power of three, breaking things down into three. And there's a wonderful Latin phrase, omne trium perfectum, things that come in three are perfect. And even no matter if your talk is going to be a few minutes, or could even be a 60 seconds delivery, or it's a long keynote presentation of 20 to 30 minutes, just think about the power of three, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And thinking about, this comes down to like creative writing, to thinking about the bare bones. You can do this with a pen and paper. You can doodle, you can draw pictures, you can story map ideas out, and then add the flesh. You then add the words. But a lot of the times you don't need to, unless you are one of those people that like to write out the full text and then bring it down. I'm a huge advocate of actually, if you've got the right structure, that power of three, beginning, middle, and end, or think about the problem statement. What is the problem statement? Tell a story. Where's the story in your delivery? And then what is the call to action? And this is where, when I ask people to do a 60 seconds presentation for me, like just introduce yourself, 60 seconds, tell me something about you. A lot of the time people then just share information, right? And that's stuff that people can get off their website. Well, what if you shared a story, share a case study, an anecdote? They're all stories. I mean, some of the best world leaders around today, if I even cite, if I go back to JP Morgan and the CEO for JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, I've been to many of his talks, and he has this wonderful ability of just connecting with his audience through simple words, simple language, and anecdotes and stories. Now, I know for a fact he has been trained by communication and speech writing coaches, because he was never that eloquent. But this is where the power of the story is coming out more and more. Now, I'm just having to move the structure and thinking about what else do we put into our storytelling. And thinking about the storytelling techniques, there are so many different storytelling techniques. You may have heard Joseph Campbell, American literature professor in the early parts of the 20th century. He wrote a book, Hero of a Thousand Faces. And this whole concept of the hero's journey came out to play. And I've seen many companies use this, which is really about thinking about the protagonist going off on their journey, going from the world of known into the world of unknown, and all the milestones and things that this person had to overcome becomes part of their story. It's the hero's journey is another name that's used, and it's used so much, particularly in the film industry. And we think about movies like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. It really follows this technique, but there are so many storytelling techniques that one can use. And I run a whole workshop on those storytelling techniques as well. But one thing, and in your structure, is think about how you throw in polar opposites, so the good things and the not so good things. Things that, thinking about your figure of speech and the use of metaphors. Metaphors are wonderful. So as an example, I walked into my manager's office and I looked at him, and he looked angry. He looked like a fire-breathing dragon. Now, me just saying that, maybe it's resonated with you. Maybe you've had one of those managers that you walked in with trepidation thinking, oh my goodness, is my manager having a good day or not so good day? So this metaphors are extremely powerful. But I do see how figure of speech can be abused. And I'll see this a lot with politicians today and their speech writers. They're using a great deal of hyperbole and figures of speech because it works, it triggers emotions. But it can be very, very dangerous as well. So use it, you know, with the right level of respect. And I spoke about story technique as well. Now, goodness me, looking at the time, and this is the thing about storytelling. Whenever I run my workshops, the time flies by in no time at all. But I want to give you guys an opportunity. Now, in the slides, and these slides will be available, but this is just a summary that I have. And just thinking about, you know, from a visual point of view, you know, the body exercises, making sure that you're nice and relaxed. Your jaw exercises. There are so many exercises one can do, just making sure your jaw is nice and relaxed. Tongue exercises. All of these things are so imperative to us being ready to be able to talk in front of our audience, whether that's one person or thousands. Thinking about our body posture, thinking about our hand movement and our eye contact. And then, of course, throughout all of that is our deep breathing. Right, what I'd like you to do really quickly is I want you to think of the topic, and I'm going to give you a topic, and that topic is going to be COVID, lockdown. So I want you, oh, I'm really sorry about that. That's not very straight at all. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to draw a graph, and that's not very straight. Back to drawing lessons with my tablet, I think. Okay, that's a bit better. Okay, and on the above, you're going to have happy emotions and sad emotions. Right, and this is our timeline. And what I'd like you to do really quickly, I'm going to give you like a minute. Think about your lockdown story, your own story, and think about the good things. What were the good things and what were the not so good things? And just plot them out. So maybe some of the good things were you got to meet many new people. You got to try out new technology. You got to work from home. You didn't have to travel. Perhaps the not so good things were, well, you couldn't socialize, you couldn't meet with your friends, you couldn't see your family. Maybe you just wanted a hug, you couldn't have a hug. And as you're doing that, start to think about the emotions. How do you feel talking about that? Do you feel, well, of course, one might feel sad, one may feel angry, one may feel quite excited, one may start to giggle and laugh. And I'll let you just do that. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you a short little story. A client I had in 2020, and we were doing these courses online. And this gentleman was from, Amsterdam in Holland, and he was talking about going shopping. And he wanted to go to the shop for one thing only. And unfortunately, the shopping centers or the supermarkets had implemented a new rule. The rule was you had to take, it was mandatory that you had to take a shopping trolley with you. So you had to take a shopping trolley because it ensured adequate distance between people. And he went in there, got what he wanted, went and paid. And throughout his whole experience of getting to the tills and coming out, he says, I looked ridiculous. And what he bought was one lettuce. One small green lettuce is what he bought. But the way that he told the story, everybody in the course was giggling and laughing. And I'll never forget that. So one thinks about the COVID story as being something melancholic or down in the, you know, a bit depressing or disheartening. But they are, mix it up because we love stories. There's got to be the polar opposites. You've got to have the good and the not so good. And have a play with it and share your COVID story. Record it on your phone and share it with a friend. Share it with a family member and see what they have to say. You could just do that over a few minutes. Now we're coming to the end, but I did say I was going to share something with you about how long have we been doing storytelling. Well, I want to take you back. This was 19. Ooh, it was no, I lied. It wasn't 19. It was 2018. And in a cave in South Africa, there's a cave called the Blombos Cave. And Blombos is Afrikaans. It's one of the languages spoken in South Africa. And it translates Blombos, flowering bush or flowering plant. Now, this cave is a paleontologist's gold mine. And because they always say, you know, it's the birthplace of mankind, is Southern Africa. And in this cave, they found a fragment of rock, a small piece of stone. And on the stone, they found a drawing. And that drawing was this shape. And they dated it, cross-hatched lines, and they dated it back to something in the region of 78,000 years ago. So the joke was 78,000 years ago, we were using the hashtag. So, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else here today, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to some Q&A, just quickly talking about the CPD accredited course that I do have. It's Applied Storytelling 360. It's 6 hours, and I can deliver this as one day, a half day, or weekly sessions, do it both online on Zoom, or I can do it in person. Speaking to some clients that have offices now, they have training rooms, I'm always trying to find ways to make sure that the cost of my training courses are done at a level that make it very inclusive to everyone. So Zoom has been amazing for that, because I haven't had venue costs, but people are wanting to do stuff back in person now. So trying to find the best ways of doing that. And what I have found is some organizations and companies are saying, hey, just use our training rooms, and that works quite well. I'm doing some work with Warwick Business School at the moment, and they have some wonderful offices in the London Shard. So we've been doing some work in those, and I have to say, one of an amazing view. Been very spoiled in that regard. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. Kirsty and Amanda, I don't know if I haven't been looking at the chat, but yeah, just open it up to anyone that really has any questions or anything. Throw it at me, please.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That's been a really kind of fascinating session, and I love the 3 V's and the practical tips that you've given us there. There's been quite a few observations in the chat about, you know, the fact that you can't always believe what somebody's face is telling you. Perhaps it's telling a different story. Danny from Dog First Aid says, do you or can you recommend any speakers who really nail storytelling that you would recommend people watching on YouTube or TED Talks or something similar?
I have quite a few. So what I'll do is I'll send through a list. And actually what I would also recommend is some of storyteller trainers that I've worked for, or worked with, I should say, who have been absolutely amazing, but relatively unknown. Because, I mean, one name that jumps out, and people may have seen this, there's a wonderful TED Talk by David Phillips called The Science of Storytelling. And David would probably profess to say he's a big fan of storytelling, and he does a lot of communication training. He's from Sweden. Lovely guy. I've tried to, obviously, he's over lockdown. If you go on TikTok, he's got like over 1 million followers now. So his business has gone, you know, a bit like that. But what I can do, if this is all right, Amanda, is there a way that I can probably share that list, and then that can be communicated to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that when we share the slides.
Now, let me put it down, and I'll put the links in.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we can send the slides, the recording, and your recommendation.
And people also ask me about books. I get the question, well, what books can I read? The one thing,
that's the question I always ask.
Yeah, the one thing I am going to put out there, and please bear this in mind. You know, imposter syndrome can come into play, because we often look at other people and go, oh my God, they're amazing. I can't do that. And the work that I do, it's not about me, it's about you. So it's all about ensuring that you are brave enough to actually give it a go. And sometimes finding safe places to practice and actually give this a go is very important. So, you know, thinking of places outside of the corporate world, and certainly not stand-up comedy. I mean, that's something on a whole different level. People say, should I give stand-up comedy a go? It's like, whoa, hang on, you know, that's really challenging. But thinking about things in your community, go on Facebook, if you're on Facebook, and just look for what community or charity groups are in your area, and just offer to go and do a talk, and do a talk about something that interests you. That's the important thing. So going back to my point, talk about something that really interests you, because you find you just come out with a whole whole different package of energy.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so there's lots of feedback about what a great session it's been. Are there any final questions for Andrew before we wrap up the session today? Kim says, love Amy Cuddy's TED Talk.
Oh God, yeah, Amy Cuddy. So Amy Cuddy, you know, she does the power pose very well. I mean, I did laugh when I saw Amy. She says, you know, the Superman pose, you put your closed fists on your hips and then just drop your arms. But Amy Cuddy's talk, I mean, especially when you come, and I used to share that quite a lot before lockdown, but then you come into lockdown and you're suddenly going, oh my goodness, all right, now I'm sitting down, what do I do? But it's still so important that we are sitting straight and we're standing straight, so that we can allow our airways to at least be able to breathe. And breathing is a big thing for me.
Good to have that reminder. Certainly, I keep thinking, right, I need to sit back and perhaps adjust my screen. Okay, all right. Well, thanks ever so much, Andrew. That draws the session to a close. We really appreciate your time today, your contribution, and your inspiration for this topic area. Thank you to everybody for joining us, for spending some time on the CPD Standards webinar. We'll be back again next month with another session. And until then, we wish you all the best with delivering your training, coaching, or online education. Any queries at all about your assessments, about your membership or your subscription fees, by all means, don't hesitate to contact us or your account manager. So thank you ever so much, Andrew, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everybody for coming along.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.